Why, hello there. The 2023 2D Souls-like Metroidvania The Last Faith is getting a big ol' free DLC on January 20th, aka the day after this video goes up. The Awakened Ancients DLC adds 3 new game modes, New Game Plus, Boss Rush mode, and a wave-based survival mode called the Tower of Despair. And there's also a new area to explore called the Dungeon, which adds 7 new enemy types, 5 new bosses, new weapons, and new NPCs to the main game. And on top of all of that, there's 3 new characters added to play with in the dungeon and in New Game Plus. Developer Kumi Souls and publisher Playstack were kind enough to let me check out the Awakened Ancients a few days early and share my thoughts and impressions. In this video, I'll discuss how to best experience the dungeon area, explain how the 3 new characters function, and give my thoughts and impressions on New Game Plus, Boss Rush, and the Tower of Despair modes. I'm trying to be mostly spoiler free with this video, and I'll talk in broader details to more specific detail in the video so that you can jump out whenever your curiosity is satiated. And with that, let's get into The Last Faith, Awakened Ancients. Now, when I booted up The Last Faith to play Awakened Ancients, I hadn't played the game since November 2023 for review. So the first thing I did was watch my review and refresh my memory. The Last Faith has lighter RPG elements. I generally like The Last Faith, particularly the atmosphere and weapon arsenal, with my criticisms of the game being around elements like the lack of respec, the lack of variety in starting gear for various classes, and a bit of visual sameness to the areas and a lack of enemy variety. If you haven't played since launch and shared my thoughts on the lack of respec and starting class gear, I'm happy to report that those wrongs were righted long before Awakened Ancients in earlier patches, with respec being added into the game and starting classes each having unique gear that fits their theme. With those criticisms addressed, it was now left to see if Awakened Ancients could do something about the variety in The Last Faith's area visuals and enemies. But before we get into that, let's talk about getting into the DLC in the first place. New Game Plus unlocks by reaching one of the endings of the main game, at which point you're prompted to go into New Game Plus. Vague ending spoilers, but my pro tip is to do the Claim the Throne ending to get this prompt most efficiently. Starting New Game Plus unlocks the Boss Rush and Tower Despair game modes, which can be accessed in the Extras section of the main game menu. As for the dungeon area, it can be accessed once you've attained the Night Hunter's Grappling Claw in New Game or New Game Plus from within the Oxneyville Manor. The Grappling Claw is the second ability you unlock in The Last Faith, meaning that you can easily access the dungeon in the early mid-game. But is that the right time to tackle the dungeon? Well, that depends. If you want your first experience with the dungeon to be at its full challenge, I'd recommend using a character in New Game or New Game Plus that's in the mid-game, as that feels like what the area and bosses were designed around. This isn't because you'll be over-leveled if you use an endgame character, which I'll explain more about that shortly, but because having all of the Metroidvania abilities makes the enemy and boss encounters a bit easier. However, if you don't mind a slightly breezier initial experience, I'd recommend using an endgame character initially, because there's unlocks found in the dungeon tied into New Game Plus. But enough dancing around the dungeon, let's dive into the dungeon. The dungeon is a new area that appears to take place alongside the story of the main game. You don't play as the main character Eric, but as one of 3 new characters that you can swap out at checkpoints. Their level, stats, and gear are static, but they share the abilities, stigma, charms, and consumables that Eric has. Over the course of playing through the dungeon, you'll find chests that will unlock these 3 characters to swap out to, in the same way throughout the entirety of the game in New Game Plus. The dungeon consists of multiple layers that represent different parts of the world, each layer culminating in a battle with one of the new bosses. There's a handful of new NPCs within the dungeon, who form the backbone of the limited story told within, that fleshes out the game world a bit more and whose quests reward Eric with new weapons. The dungeon was pretty decent in size, taking me a bit over an hour from the first layer to the final boss, earning me one of the new skins that are scattered throughout the DLC as rewards. However, my endgame Eric's charms and abilities seem to smooth over the challenge of exploration and combat a bit, and entering the dungeon earlier in the progression of the game would present more of a challenge and take longer to progress through. But even then, the static nature of the characters played as in the dungeon does limit the player's control over the challenge, taking away the option to impose level or weapon challenges within the area like base level or weapon runs, or to mitigate the challenge by over leveling or bringing in weapons with endgame upgrades. Even with the limited control, I found all of the bosses to be pretty fun fights and cool designs, if a bit on the easier side. The new enemies were also a fun change of pace and generally mixed up well within the more standard enemies from the main game that still feature heavily in the new area. As far as the visual and level design of the dungeon, I found it a bit lacking ultimately. One of my criticisms of the base game was a lack of variety in the color palette and biomes featured. The dungeon, being something of a retread through these areas, misses an opportunity to add in that variety, creating more world that is also more of the same. The level design is also not particularly noteworthy, generally following in the footsteps of the main game and asking the player to explore and find a key or pull a crank to unlock the way forward without any meaningful wrinkles in this formula. The most memorable touch to the dungeon's visual design was an experience I haven't had in a minute, which is when you're walking through a game and then you stumble upon a hallway featuring a series of paintings or statues rendering the likeness of Kickstarter backers or their personas, reminding you that it's a crowdfunded game. New Game Plus, as you'd expect, lets you play through the game against tougher enemies and bosses while keeping your level, stats, gear, weapons, spells, and interestingly enough, notes from your previous game. Stigma, abilities, and key items are reset, however. One of the interesting wrinkles of New Game Plus is that you can ascend your weapons to moon weapons by finding a new item called the Labradorite Gemstone throughout the world, usually in places where you originally found weapons in your first playthrough. A weapon can be upgraded this way once per New Game Plus, and when this happens, it resets the weapon's level. This is a way to keep the numbers up to continue to meet the challenge of New Game Plus, while also maintaining a sense of character progression that can sometimes be lost during New Game Plus in other games. This system also provides progression to the characters unlocked for New Game Plus in the dungeon. Like in the dungeon, the Three Stooges' level, stats, and weapons remain static, but when Eric ascends a weapon to a moon weapon, the other characters' weapons also become moon weapons and match the weapon level of the highest level moon weapon that Eric has. While these characters and their almost non-existent customizability felt like a bit of an awkward fit at first, especially when they poof away in cutscenes, I do like them as a means to essentially have 4 character builds that you can swap between in any given situation. My Eric is a buff boy with a strength build, but during my time in New Game Plus, I'd just switch over to Sephiroth or Creepy Smile Guy for a bit to mix things up. New Game Plus in games to me work best as a fun romp that eschews the story and world a bit in favor of playing around with the game and systems, and I think The Last Faith does a pretty decent job of that with the moon weapon system and character swapping that make it a bit more than simply bigger numbers for everything. The Boss Rush and Tower of Despair modes do exactly what you think they'd do. The Boss Rush is a gauntlet of bosses from the game, including optional bosses except those from the dungeon that you fight back to back, receiving a heal and some items to top you off between each fight. The Tower of Despair features a number of waves of enemies from across the game that ramp up in difficulty as you progress. For both of these modes, you get to choose a save file to use and choose between playing as Eric or any of the 3 added characters. They both reward you with a skin for completing them and are timed to let you try and beat your own score. To be honest, I don't really get too into Boss Rush or Gauntlet modes, but I think both of these are really serviceable and fun, if a bit slight compared to similar modes in other titles. Fans of these kinds of gauntlets might feel the lack of grading or additional modifiers that some other titles offer, but as someone casually engaging with them, I think they're a fun addition. The Last Faith Awakened Ancients DLC is a solid addition to a pretty solid 2D Souls-like Metroidvania. This free DLC offers up a good reason for people to return to the game who haven't played since launch, as well as a good draw for new players to engage with the most polished version of the game to date that features a breadth of content in line with similar games in the genre like Blasphemous or Death's Gambit. For those who have been playing the game since its release in 2023, the new content adds a fair amount of fresh replayability with New Game Plus, but I do think that the dungeon area may end up feeling a little less fresh, even if it still offers a handful of new bosses and enemies to enjoy. How does the Awakened Ancients DLC sound to you? Let me know in the comments. Awakened Ancients comes out January 20th, 2026 on all platforms shown on screen except for Switch, which has a delay and the developer is working on getting up and running as soon as possible. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a like, and for more Souls-like and Metroidvania content, subscribe to The Lore Hunter. I have lots of Blasphemous and Elden Ring videos on the channel that range from story and lore theories to design discussion, and there's more to come. For instance, the Last Faith publisher Playstack also published Mortal Shell and is publishing its sequel, Mortal Shell 2, due out later this year in 2026. As always, thanks for your support, thank the Last Faith for this execution move, and thanks for watching.